My parents called me demanding I come home immediately for an urgent family meeting, or they'd cut me off forever. But after I got promoted with a 90K salary, they started apologizing. My name is Connor, and I'm 26 years old. What I'm about to share with you happened 8 months ago, but I'm finally ready to tell this story. Before I dive into the absolute disaster that became my life, let me give you some crucial background so you can understand why what happened hit so hard and why what came next was so incredibly satisfying. Yes, I was still living at home at 26. But here's the thing everyone conveniently forgets when they judge that situation. I wasn't some basement-dwelling loser playing video games all day and mooching off my parents. I have a degree in economics from a decent state school. It wasn't Harvard Business School, but it definitely wasn't some diploma mill either. I graduated with a 3.7 GPA and minimal student debt because I worked retail every single summer and saved every penny I earned. Instead of blowing my money on spring break trips and party weekends like most of my classmates, I was focused on building a solid financial foundation. The problem was timing, pure and simple. I graduated right into the economic chaos of 2020, when everything went sideways overnight and entry-level jobs dried up completely. I spent 2 full years applying for positions in my field while working at a sporting goods store to pay off what little debt I had and help with household expenses. It was frustrating, but I stayed disciplined and kept working toward my goals. Finally, I managed to land a position at a local credit union doing risk assessment work. The money wasn't amazing, but it was honest work with solid benefits and real room for advancement. More importantly, it was actually using my economics degree in a meaningful way. I was living at home specifically to save money for a house down payment, and I had a clear plan to make it happen. I'd managed to save about $32,000 in a high-yield savings account, and I was aiming for $48,000 before buying my first place. My parents had always said they were proud of my financial discipline and long-term thinking. They bragged to neighbors about how responsible and mature I was being, planning for the future instead of rushing into expensive apartment rentals or making impulsive decisions. At least they did until 4 months ago, when everything changed overnight. Let me tell you about the rest of my family because their situations become incredibly relevant to this story. My sister Brittany is 24 and married to this guy named Tyler, who sells insurance and somehow thinks that makes him the next Warren Buffett. She has a marketing degree from a decent school that she's never actually used because Tyler allegedly makes enough money to support both of them. She drives a BMW X3 that she definitely can't afford on their actual income. And she's constantly posting Instagram stories from expensive restaurants and shopping trips that cost more than I make in a week. My brother Jake is 22 and works in sales at a big electronics store. He lives with his girlfriend in an apartment complex that honestly looks like it was built during the Carter administration and hasn't been updated since. He's always going on about his investment strategies and building wealth through what he calls alternative methods. From what I could tell, this mostly involved cryptocurrency day trading and various get-rich-quick schemes he found on YouTube. My dad runs a small landscaping business with just him and usually 2 to 3 seasonal workers, depending on the contracts he can secure. For years, he was doing reasonably well. Nothing spectacular, but steady income that supported our family comfortably. Lately, though, he'd been increasingly stressed about changing market conditions and rising equipment costs, with customers wanting to pay less for more work. My mom works part-time at a medical office doing billing and insurance claims, maybe 25 hours a week. Between her income and dad's business, they'd always seemed financially stable, at least from my perspective as their son. So when my phone started going absolutely crazy last Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing loan applications and credit reports at work, I naturally figured someone was in the hospital or there had been some kind of serious emergency. 3 missed calls from my mom in just 10 minutes, followed by increasingly urgent text messages that made my stomach drop. When I finally stepped away from my desk to call her back, she sounded weird. Not panicked like I expected, but almost excited in a really uncomfortable way that immediately put me on edge. "Connor, you need to come home right now," she said without any pleasantries. "We're having an emergency family meeting, and everyone's already here waiting for you." "What kind of emergency?" I asked, my mind racing through possibilities. "Is someone hurt? Did something happen to Grandpa?" "Just get here as fast as you can," she replied tersely. "You have 20 minutes or we're making this decision without you. And trust me, you want to be here for this." The 15-minute drive home was incredibly nerve-wracking. I kept running through possibilities in my head. Someone had died. Someone was seriously ill. There was a financial emergency or legal trouble. I couldn't think of any family decision that would need to be made so urgently that they couldn't wait for me to properly finish my workday and drive home safely. The whole situation felt ominous and wrong. When I pulled into our driveway, it looked like a combination of a family reunion and a funeral. There was Brittany's white BMW X3, Jake's red Mustang, which he also definitely can't afford on his sales commissions, Uncle Steve's pickup truck, both sets of grandparents' cars, and vehicles belonging to cousins I barely see except at major holidays. I counted 12 vehicles crammed into our driveway and parked along the street in front of our house. Walking into that house was like entering a courtroom where I was obviously the defendant. 26 family members were sitting in a perfect semicircle formation around our living room and dining room. Every chair from both rooms had been moved to create this theatrical setup, and people were sitting on the stairs and on folding chairs that had been brought in from the garage. The only empty seat in the entire arrangement was a single chair positioned in the center, facing everyone else. Clearly my designated spot. The room went dead quiet when I walked through the front door. Not the normal family gathering quiet where conversations just naturally fade when someone enters, but hostile, uncomfortable quiet, like I'd interrupted something very important, and everyone was annoyed that I'd finally shown up to face whatever judgment they'd prepared. My dad stood up from his position at the front of the group, holding a laptop computer and a thick manila folder. His expression was serious and formal in a way I'd never seen before, like he was about to deliver a business presentation rather than talk to his son. "Sit down, Connor," he said sternly. "We need to have a very important conversation about your future. I've been to a couple of interventions for friends with serious addiction problems, so I recognized the setup immediately. But that didn't make sense. I don't do anything destructive. I don't have any kind of addiction or harmful behavior patterns. What could this possibly be about?" "Connor," my dad started, opening his folder and pulling out what looked like printed charts and graphs. "You're 26 years old. You're living in our house, eating our food, using our utilities, taking up space, and contributing almost nothing meaningful to this family's overall success and reputation. Wait, what? I pay $400 a month in rent, plus my own car insurance, phone bill, and most of my own food. I help with yard work and household maintenance whenever needed." What was he talking about? "Your sister Brittany has built a beautiful, successful life with Tyler," he continued, gesturing toward them with obvious pride. "They just purchased a $320,000 house in West Shore and are already talking seriously about starting a family and building generational wealth. Your brother Jake is launching his own investment business and has already generated over $14,000 in profit just this quarter from his cryptocurrency and trading strategies." I glanced over at Jake, who couldn't make eye contact with me. $14,000 in profit? This was the same guy who had borrowed $750 from me just 6 months ago because he couldn't make rent after what he called a temporary setback in his trading account. "Meanwhile," my dad continued, his voice getting more stern and disappointed with every word, "you're working at a small credit union making entry-level wages in what amounts to a position with no clear prospects for meaningful advancement. You have no girlfriend or romantic prospects, no ambition to improve your situation, and you're actively dragging down this family's reputation in the community." That's when Brittany stood up from her position in the semicircle, and this is where things went from uncomfortable to absolutely brutal. "Connor, do you have any idea how embarrassing it is when my friends and Tyler's colleagues see you working at that little neighborhood credit union branch?" she said with obvious disdain. "They ask me why my brother is stuck in some dead-end clerical job instead of actually using his expensive college degree for something impressive. I constantly have to make excuses for you and change the subject because it's so humiliating." "I'm not in a clerical position, Brittany," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a risk assessment specialist. It's a professional role that requires my economics degree." "Risk assessment specialist isn't real finance," she snapped back with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Tyler explained it to me. That's just paperwork processing with a fancy title to make you feel better about yourself. Real finance professionals at real companies make six-figure salaries and have actual responsibility." Then Jake jumped in, finally looking at me directly. "My girlfriend's little sister goes to school with some kids whose parents know you, and she asked why Uncle Connor always looks so tired and stressed out all the time. I honestly didn't know what to tell her because it's like you've completely given up on having any kind of successful life." My mom was crying at this point, but it was angry crying, not sad crying. The kind of tears that come with frustration and disappointment rather than grief or concern. "We have supported you financially and emotionally for 26 years, Connor," she said through her tears. 26 years. And this is what we get in return. You were supposed to be our success story, our proof that we raised our children right. Instead, you're just existing, taking up space, going through the motions of life without any real purpose or ambition. That's when Uncle Steve stood up and opened the laptop computer he'd been holding. We've prepared a comprehensive presentation to help you understand exactly where you stand compared to your peers and what needs to change immediately. A PowerPoint presentation. They had made an actual PowerPoint presentation about my life. I genuinely wish I was making this up, but I'm not. The title slide displayed on our big screen TV read, Connor's Quarter Life Crisis, a comprehensive analysis of underachievement and required corrective actions. Slide 1 was titled Income Comparison Analysis. It featured a chart showing Brittany and Tyler's combined household income, Jake's projected annual earnings, and my salary highlighted in red as being below acceptable standards for someone with my education and age. Slide 2 was Living Situation Benchmarking. This included statistics showing that 87% of college-educated men my age live independently, with a pie chart breaking down different living arrangements. There was a red arrow pointing to Lives with Parents that was specifically labeled as Connor's current situation. Slide 3 was Relationship Status Evaluation. This was an actual timeline of my dating history over the past 5 years, with analysis points about why each relationship ended and what this supposedly indicated about my personal development and social skills. Slide 4 was Financial Contribution Analysis. It contained detailed charts showing that I was the only adult child still financially dependent on my parents, with calculations of household expenses and my allegedly inadequate contribution relative to my income. Slide 5 was Professional Development Trajectory. This was a comparison chart showing career advancement timelines for successful family members versus my stagnant position, with projections showing that I would never achieve financial independence at my current pace. 26 people, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, family friends, sat there nodding along and murmuring agreement while they systematically destroyed every piece of my life with charts, graphs, and statistical analysis. But the real kicker was slide 6, the intervention plan and ultimatum. Connor has exactly 60 days from today to secure employment, paying a minimum of $73,000 annually, and establish independent housing arrangements, Uncle Steve read from the screen. Or he will be permanently removed from all family activities, holiday celebrations, and inheritance considerations. This decision is final and non-negotiable. Uncle Steve looked directly at me with what I think he believed was tough love, but felt like pure hostility. We took a formal vote before you arrived today, Connor. It was unanimous. All 26 family members present agreed that you need this wake-up call to finally start living up to your potential. I sat there for what felt like forever, trying to process what had just happened. 26 family members had spent weeks, maybe months, planning this elaborate intervention. They'd created a professional presentation complete with research and statistics about why I was a failure. Then they'd voted to essentially disown me if I didn't meet their arbitrary income requirement in exactly 2 months. Does anyone want to hear my perspective on why I'm still living at home? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. We don't need to hear excuses, Brittany said dismissively. We need to see results and meaningful changes in your behavior. I'm not making excuses. I'm saving money for a house down payment. I have $32,000 in savings right now. I was planning to buy a place within the next year once I hit my $48,000 target. $32,000? Tyler actually laughed out loud. Connor, that's barely enough for a down payment on a decent car, let alone a house worth living in. That's when something fundamental clicked in my brain. These people weren't trying to help me or motivate me to improve my life. They were trying to humiliate me in front of the entire extended family. This wasn't an intervention. It was a public execution designed to make them feel better about their own problems. I stood up slowly and looked around the room at all 26 faces, staring at me expectantly, waiting for me to break down, apologize, promise to change, beg for forgiveness and another chance. Instead, I smiled and said, "Okay, I accept your challenge. But when I succeed, and I will succeed, every single one of you is going to regret this day for the rest of your lives." Then I walked out. No dramatic door slamming, no shouting, no emotional breakdown. I just left quietly and drove away. I went straight to my best friend Derek's apartment. He's been my closest friend since high school and knows my family well enough to understand all the complicated dynamics. When I told him what had just happened, his immediate reaction was, "What is wrong with your family? That's absolutely insane." Derek let me crash on his couch while I figured out my next move, which was incredibly generous since his place is tiny and he's got his own life to worry about. Having that safe space to process everything was exactly what I needed. The first thing I did was start applying aggressively for every job I could find that might be a step up from my current position. But I also started thinking carefully about what I'd observed during that intervention. Something felt really off about the whole situation. Why now? Why such an aggressive formal ultimatum? Why the elaborate PowerPoint presentation instead of just having a normal family conversation about their concerns? I started thinking about the financial situations of the people who'd been most vocal during the intervention. Brittany's BMW payments had to be astronomical. Those things lease for $500 plus per month minimum. Jake's investment profits seemed highly suspicious, given that he'd asked to borrow money from me relatively recently. And my dad's landscaping business had clearly been struggling more than he'd been letting on, based on his stress levels and comments I'd overheard. I decided to do some serious research into what was really going on with my family's finances. My first stop was Brittany's social media presence. Her Instagram account was an absolute goldmine of financial irresponsibility and lifestyle inflation. She posted multiple times per week showing dinners at restaurants that cost $200 plus per person for her and Tyler. There were shopping trips with bags from Nordstrom, Kate Spade, and other stores I couldn't afford to walk into. Weekend trips to expensive resorts and spas, all of it posted with captions like "Blessed Life," "Living Our Best Life," and "Grateful for Abundance." But here's the thing that didn't add up at all. Tyler sells insurance for a regional company. Even good insurance salespeople in our area typically max out around $58,000 annually. Even if Brittany was working full-time, which she's not, their combined legitimate income couldn't possibly support the lifestyle documented on her social media. I started digging deeper into public records and information that's legally available to anyone who knows where to look. Property records showed they'd bought their $320,000 house with only a 3% down payment, meaning they'd borrowed over $310,000 and were immediately underwater on the mortgage. The BMW wasn't owned. It was leased at what had to be an enormous monthly payment. I also discovered they'd taken out a home equity line of credit less than 6 months after buying the house. Derek works in banking and was able to help me understand some of the credit reporting information that's accessible through legitimate channels without violating anyone's privacy or doing anything illegal. What we could see was that Brittany and Tyler were maxed out on at least 7 different credit cards and had multiple personal loans from online lenders, the kind with really high interest rates that people use when traditional banks won't lend to them anymore. Jake's situation was even more problematic once I started paying attention to the details. His investment profits appeared to be connected to a cryptocurrency scheme that I recognized as a pump and dump operation after doing some research. The $14,000 he'd claimed to have made during the intervention was apparently money he'd borrowed from 3 different family members, including our grandparents, by promising to double their investment within 6 months. But the most shocking discovery came when I stopped by my dad's business office to pick up some tools I'd left there after helping him with a project a few weeks earlier. He wasn't there when I arrived, so I ended up talking with his longtime secretary while I looked for my stuff. She's worked for him for 15 years and has always been really friendly with our family, but she looked incredibly stressed and worn down. She mentioned in passing that they'd had to let both of their full-time employees go last month. "Is business really that slow?" I asked, genuinely concerned about what this meant for my dad's company. "It's not just slow, Connor," she replied, with obvious worry in her voice. "We haven't landed a single new contract in over 7 weeks. Your dad's been bidding existing jobs at barely above cost just to keep the lights on and pay basic expenses." That's when I noticed the stack of official-looking notices on her desk. There were past due bills, collection notices, and what looked like legal documents. I couldn't read the details without being inappropriate, but I could see enough to understand that my dad's business was in serious financial trouble. The pieces started coming together in my mind. My family wasn't genuinely concerned about my success or personal development. They were all facing their own financial disasters and desperately needed a scapegoat to blame for their problems. Over the next 2 weeks, I applied for jobs with an intensity and focus I'd never had before, and I managed to get interviews with 3 different companies. But I also continued quietly investigating my family's real financial situation, and what I discovered was so much worse than I'd initially thought. The breakthrough in my understanding came when I randomly ran into my cousin Ben at a coffee shop downtown. Ben's an accountant who handles bookkeeping for several small businesses in the area, including my dad's landscaping company. We got to talking, and after some casual conversation, Ben accidentally let slip some information that he probably shouldn't have shared. Your dad's been asking around to see if anyone might be interested in buying the business, Ben mentioned casually. But honestly, there's not much to buy except debt at this point. How bad is it? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Ben looked uncomfortable, clearly realizing he'd said too much. I probably shouldn't be discussing this, but since your family, Connor, your dad is 3 months behind on his business loan payments and facing bankruptcy. The house has been remortgaged twice, and your parents are struggling to make even the reduced payments. That night, I called Uncle Steve. He's my dad's older brother and runs a successful electrical contracting business. We'd always gotten along well, and he'd seemed genuinely uncomfortable during the intervention, like he hadn't fully understood what he was signing up for. Uncle Steve, can I ask you something honestly? I said when he answered the phone. What was that intervention meeting really supposed to accomplish? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Connor, your parents asked everyone to participate in a family meeting about your future. They said you were struggling with direction and needed support from everyone to help you reach your potential. None of us knew it was going to be so formal and harsh. Did you know they were planning to essentially disown me if I don't meet their income requirement? What? No, absolutely not, Uncle Steve replied, his voice filled with surprise and concern. They told everyone we were having a career planning session to brainstorm ways to help you find better opportunities. This was a crucial revelation. My parents had systematically lied to most of the extended family about the actual purpose of the meeting. They'd told people we were having a supportive career development session to help me achieve my goals, not a hostile intervention with ultimatums and threats. Uncle Steve was genuinely upset when I explained what had actually happened. That's not what any of us agreed to participate in, Connor. I thought we were there to encourage and support you, not to threaten and humiliate you. Over the following week, I had similar conversations with several other family members who'd been present at the intervention. The consistent story was that my parents had misrepresented the meeting's purpose to get people to attend. Most of them thought they were coming to a positive family gathering focused on helping me explore career options. But this raised an obvious question. Why had my parents orchestrated such an elaborate deception? The answer became clear when I finally landed a job interview that went exceptionally well. The position was Senior Risk Assessment Analyst at a much larger company, with significantly more responsibility and growth potential. They initially offered me $70,000, which was still just under my family's arbitrary $73,000 threshold. I negotiated professionally and managed to get them up to $76,000, plus better benefits and a company car allowance. Suddenly, I had exactly what my family had demanded. A job paying well over $73,000 annually. I could go back to them and shove their ultimatum right back in their faces. But that felt too easy and didn't address the fundamental problem. They'd humiliated me in front of 26 people with a professionally prepared PowerPoint presentation. They'd lied to extended family members to manipulate them into participating. They'd created an elaborate charade to avoid taking responsibility for their own financial failures. Simply getting the job they demanded felt like letting them off the hook too easily. They deserved to face some real consequences for what they'd done. That's when I started developing a plan that would turn the tables completely and give them a taste of their own medicine. With my new job starting in 3 weeks, I had time to conduct a thorough investigation into my family's actual financial situation. What I discovered was far worse than even my most pessimistic expectations. My dad's landscaping business wasn't just struggling. It was functionally bankrupt and had been for months. He owed $49,000 in back taxes to the IRS, $26,000 to various suppliers and contractors, and was 3 months behind on an $82,000 business loan that was secured by both his business equipment and our family home. Most of his landscaping equipment was financed through separate loans and was about to be repossessed due to missed payments. My parents' house situation was even more dire than I'd realized. They'd bought the house outright 15 years ago when my dad's business was thriving, but they had systematically borrowed against it during slow periods. They now had a $185,000 mortgage after 2 separate refinancing events, and they were currently 2 months behind on payments with foreclosure proceedings already initiated by the bank. Brittany and Tyler's financial situation was a complete house of cards that could collapse at any moment. The $320,000 house that Brittany had bragged about during the intervention, they'd put down exactly $9,600, the absolute minimum required, and were already $17,000 behind on mortgage payments after less than a year of ownership. The BMW lease was costing them $530 per month, which was absolutely insane given their actual household income. They owed $36,000 on 8 different credit cards, had taken out a $26,000 personal loan at 19% annual interest, and had borrowed an additional $14,000 from Tyler's parents under false pretenses. Jake's business venture was even more pathetic than I'd suspected. He'd convinced our 71-year-old grandfather to invest $8,500 in his cryptocurrency trading scheme by promising guaranteed returns of 200% within 6 months. When the inevitable crash happened, Jake lost not only the entire investment, but an additional $2,800 of his own money. He was now working double shifts at the electronics store and had taken out multiple payday loans to try to pay back our grandfather before anyone in the family found out about the scam. But here's what made me genuinely angry. While all of them were drowning in debt and facing serious financial consequences for their irresponsible decisions, they'd spent months planning an elaborate intervention to kick me out of the house because I was supposedly the family's financial burden and source of shame. I was literally the only person in the entire family with substantial savings, zero debt, a stable income, and a clear plan for financial independence. Yet somehow, I was the problem that needed to be fixed. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. My dad's secretary mentioned during a casual conversation that my parents had been systematically asking various family members for loans over the past several months, always claiming the money was needed for business expansion opportunities or temporary cash flow issues. Several relatives had already lent them money that would obviously never be repaid. Your mom called me yesterday asking if I knew anyone who might be interested in renting a room in their house, she told me. She said they were looking for additional income sources to help with some financial challenges. That's when I finally understood the real motivation behind the intervention. They desperately needed my room to rent out for extra income to help cover their mortgage payments. The 60-day ultimatum wasn't about motivating me to improve my life. It was about getting me out of the house as quickly as possible so they could monetize my living space. But they couldn't just kick out their adult son without some kind of moral justification that would make them look like responsible parents rather than desperate people exploiting their own child. So they created this elaborate intervention scenario to make it appear they were helping me while actually helping themselves. I was having lunch with my new supervisor to discuss my start date when she mentioned that the company was looking for someone to take over management of a major client relationship that had become available unexpectedly. It would require significantly more responsibility and some travel, but the position paid $96,000 base salary plus performance bonuses. You impressed everyone during the interview process, she said. We think you could handle the additional challenge, and it would put you on a fast track for senior management within 2 years. I accepted the position immediately. Suddenly, I wasn't just meeting their demands. I was absolutely crushing them. $96,000 base salary, company car allowance, expense account for client entertainment, and a clear pathway to 6-figure earnings within 2 years. I was going to make more money than anyone in my family except Tyler, and his income was mostly debt-financed illusion anyway. That's when Uncle Steve inadvertently gave me the idea that would change everything and provide the perfect opportunity for poetic justice. Uncle Steve called me about 2 weeks before my family's 60-day ultimatum was set to expire. He'd been thinking about the intervention and was increasingly uncomfortable with how everything had been handled. Connor, I've been reflecting on that family meeting, and something really doesn't feel right about the whole situation, he said. Your parents asked me to help motivate and support you, not to threaten and humiliate you in front of everyone. I told him about my new job and the $96,000 salary, and he was genuinely excited and proud of my success. That's fantastic news, he said enthusiastically. You should call your parents right away and share the good news with everyone. I'm planning to wait until the deadline expires, I replied. Let them worry about whether I'll actually meet their requirements. That's when Uncle Steve mentioned something that opened up an entirely new possibility for my response strategy. You know, your dad came to me last week asking for a substantial loan, he said. He said the business was having temporary cash flow issues, and he needed $23,000 to cover payroll and essential expenses. Did you lend him the money? I asked. Absolutely not. I lent him money 3 years ago that he never paid back, and I'm not making that mistake again. But Connor, if he's desperate enough to ask me for money, the situation must be really dire. Uncle Steve runs a very successful electrical contracting business and has always been regarded as the most financially successful person in our extended family. If my dad was approaching him for loans, it meant the situation was beyond desperate. What if there was a way to help them while also making a point about how they treated me? I asked. What do you mean? That's when I explained the plan that had been forming in my mind. It was admittedly petty and calculating, but it was also poetic justice that would address the real problem while providing them with a solution. Uncle Steve's business was successful enough that he'd been actively looking for real estate investment opportunities to diversify his holdings. What if, instead of simply lending my dad money that would never be repaid, we created a solution that would save my parents' house while also fundamentally changing the power dynamic in our relationship? I've got $32,000 in savings that I was planning to use for a house down payment, I told him. You've got business connections with banks and real estate investors. What if we found a way to purchase my parents' mortgage debt? Uncle Steve was quiet for a long time while he thought through the implications. Connor, that's actually a brilliant business strategy. If they're in default and facing foreclosure, the bank would probably be willing to sell the mortgage at a significant discount to avoid the costs and complications of the foreclosure process. We spent the next week researching the process and working out the financial details. My parents currently owed $185,000 on their house, but they were in default, and the foreclosure process had already begun. The bank would likely accept $145,000 to transfer the mortgage and avoid the legal costs, time delays, and potential losses connected with foreclosure, auction, and resale. Between my savings and Uncle Steve's investment capital, we could easily acquire the debt and essentially become my parents' new landlords instead of their son and brother-in-law. But Connor, Uncle Steve warned me, this is a nuclear option. Once you do something like this, there's no possibility of returning to normal family relationships. This will permanently change everything. Uncle Steve, they humiliated me in front of 26 people with a PowerPoint presentation about my failures, I replied. Then they gave me an ultimatum based on complete lies about their own financial situation. Normal family relationships ended 2 months ago. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and justice. We would acquire their mortgage through Uncle Steve's investment company, which was a completely legal and standard business transaction. My parents could continue living in the house, but they would be making monthly payments to us instead of to the bank. We would charge them fair market rent, which would actually be lower than their current mortgage payments and much more manageable given their financial situation. But here's the most satisfying part. They wouldn't know I was involved in the transaction until after all the papers were signed and the deal was completed. 3 days before my 60-day deadline, I received a text message from my mom. Connor, your 60 days are almost up. Have you managed to find a job that meets our requirements? I didn't respond. The next day, Brittany sent me a message. Hope you're prepared to apologize for how you acted during our family meeting. Mom and Dad might be willing to give you another chance if you ask nicely and show that you've learned something. The day before the deadline, Jake actually called me. Dude, just get any job and tell them it pays $73,000. They'll never actually check your salary, and you can buy yourself time to figure out something better. That's when I knew they had absolutely no idea what was coming and had learned nothing from their own financial disasters. The final family meeting was scheduled for Sunday at 2 p.m., exactly 60 days after the original intervention. I showed up wearing a brand new suit I'd bought specifically for job interviews and driving a rental car instead of my usual beaten-up Honda Civic. The same 26 people were there, although this time the energy in the room was completely different. Instead of the hostile anticipation from 2 months earlier, there was an atmosphere of smug satisfaction. They clearly thought they had won, and I was about to admit defeat. My dad stood up with his manila folder again, obviously prepared for what he expected to be my surrender speech. Connor, your 60 days are officially up, he announced formally. Do you have a job offer that meets our family's requirements? I pulled out my phone and showed them the employment contract displayed clearly on the screen. Senior Risk Assessment Analyst position. $96,000 base salary, company car allowance, full benefits package, and performance bonuses. My start date is tomorrow morning. The room went completely silent. Brittany's face went pale. Jake's mouth literally fell open. Several people looked confused, like they couldn't process what I had just said. $96,000? My mom asked, clearly shocked. Plus bonuses and performance incentives, I confirmed. My total compensation should reach approximately $112,000 in the first year. My dad was struggling to process this information. That's excellent, Connor. We knew you had the potential to succeed if you just applied yourself properly. No, I said firmly. You didn't believe I could succeed. You made a PowerPoint presentation about my failures and threatened to disown me. You never had faith in my abilities. You just needed me out of this house for your own financial reasons." "What are you talking about?" Brittany asked defensively. That's when I pulled out my own laptop and connected it to their television, just like they had done to me 2 months earlier. "Since you enjoyed presentations so much, I prepared one for you. It's titled The Real Family Crisis, a comprehensive analysis of financial irresponsibility and deception." Slide 1. Brittany and Tyler's complete debt-to-income analysis, including screenshots of her Instagram posts showing purchases they obviously couldn't afford on their actual income. Slide 2. Jake's cryptocurrency scam and the detailed breakdown of money he had stolen from our grandfather under false pretenses. Slide 3. My dad's business bankruptcy timeline and documentation of the imminent repossession of his equipment due to unpaid loans. Slide 4. My parents' mortgage default situation and the foreclosure proceedings that were already underway. Slide 5. A comprehensive list of family members who had been approached for loans under false pretenses, with dates and amounts. "What I still don't understand," I said, looking around the room at all their shocked faces, "is how you managed to convince 26 people to participate in humiliating me when every single one of you is in worse financial condition than I've ever been in my entire life." Brittany was crying now, but they were tears of embarrassment and anger rather than sadness. "Connor, you don't understand the kind of pressure we're all dealing with right now." "No, Brittany, you don't understand pressure," I replied calmly. "Pressure is being ambushed by your entire family and told you're a failure when you're actually the most financially responsible and stable person in the room." That's when Uncle Steve stood up and pulled out a folder of legal documents. "Connor, should I tell them about the other recent development?" "Please do." Uncle Steve opened his folder and addressed the room formally. 2 days ago, my investment company successfully acquired the mortgage on this property from First National Bank. The previous homeowners had defaulted on their payments, and we purchased the debt at a significant discount to fair market value. My dad's face went completely white. "What exactly are you saying, Steve?" "I'm saying that you no longer owe First National Bank $185,000, Uncle Steve explained matter-of-factly. "You now owe us $145,000, and we are officially your landlords. The good news is that we're only going to charge you $1,250 per month in rent, which is substantially less than your previous mortgage payment." "You can't do that to us," my mom said, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Actually, we can, and we did," Uncle Steve replied. "It's a completely standard and legal real estate transaction that happens thousands of times every month across the country. The bank was happy to avoid the costs and complications of foreclosure, and we got a solid investment property." Brittany was sobbing now, finally understanding the implications. "This is insane. You're destroying our family over money." "I'm not destroying anything," I said calmly. "I'm solving problems that you created. You wanted me to make $73,000. I'm making $96,000. You wanted me to move out. I'm moving out this week. You wanted me to contribute financially to the family. I just saved your house from foreclosure and gave you a rent payment that you can actually afford." Jake finally found his voice. "What do you want from us, Connor?" "I don't want anything from any of you," I replied. "You made it crystal clear that I'm not truly part of this family unless I meet your arbitrary financial criteria. Well, now I exceed those criteria by a substantial margin, but our relationship has been permanently changed by your actions." I packed up my laptop and headed toward the door. "Connor, wait!" my mom called out desperately. "We can work this out as a family. We can fix this." I turned around one final time. "You were right about one thing in your presentation. I did need to grow up and become financially independent. But what you didn't realize is that I was already more financially responsible than any of you have ever been. The intervention wasn't about helping me. It was about finding a scapegoat for your own failures." "We never meant for it to go this far," my dad said, his voice breaking. "We were just desperate and didn't know what else to do. You humiliated me in front of 26 people with charts and graphs about why I'm a disappointment," I said. "You lied to half the family about what the meeting was really for. You gave me an ultimatum designed to force me out so you could rent my room to strangers. And you did all of this while being in worse financial shape than I've ever been in my life." "But we're family," Brittany sobbed. "Families forgive each other and move forward." "You're right. We are family," I acknowledged. "Which is exactly why what you did is so unforgivable. You used family relationships to manipulate and humiliate me when you should have been honest about your problems and asked for help like adults." Uncle Steve stepped forward and handed my dad an envelope. "The rental agreement and payment schedule are in there. First payment is due on the 15th of next month." We're charging below market rate, and there's no security deposit required since you're family. This is blackmail, Tyler said angrily. No, Tyler, this is business, I replied. Something you might want to learn about before you lose that $320,000 house you can't actually afford. I walked toward the door again, and this time no one tried to stop me. Connor, Uncle Steve called out. Do you want to say anything else before we leave? I looked around the room one more time at all the faces that had been so smug and satisfied just an hour earlier. I hope this experience teaches all of you that financial responsibility isn't about how much money you make. It's about living within your means, being honest about your situation, and not trying to solve your problems by destroying other people. You all spent months planning an intervention for the wrong person. I was never the problem in this family. I was the solution you were too proud and too dishonest to accept. We walked out together, Uncle Steve and I, leaving behind 26 people who finally understood that their carefully orchestrated plan had backfired spectacularly. Derek was waiting in his car outside. He'd offered to give me a ride to my new apartment, which I'd secured with my first month's rent paid entirely from my own savings. How do you feel? He asked as we drove away. Honestly, relieved, I replied. For the first time in months, I don't have to pretend that their financial disasters are somehow my responsibility. I don't have to listen to lectures about success from people who are drowning in debt. And I don't have to live in a house where I'm treated like a burden instead of a family member. What happens now? Now I start my new job tomorrow, making more money than I ever thought possible at 26. I move into my own place with money left over for furniture and a solid emergency fund. And I let them figure out how to manage their own financial disasters without using me as a scapegoat. Do you think you'll ever have a relationship with them again? Maybe someday, I said thoughtfully. But it will have to be on completely different terms. They'll have to acknowledge what they did was wrong and prove that they've learned to take responsibility for their own choices and consequences. Until then, I'm focusing on building the successful, independent life they claimed they wanted me to have. 8 months later, here I am. I'm thriving in my new position. I've been promoted twice already, and my total compensation is now approaching $130,000 annually. I live in a beautiful apartment that I can easily afford. I have a substantial emergency fund, and I'm back on track to buy a house within the next 2 years. My family? Well, let's just say the rent payments have been coming in on time every month. Uncle Steve occasionally updates me on their situation. Apparently, the lower housing costs have actually helped stabilize their finances somewhat. My dad's business is slowly recovering, and my parents have started making more realistic financial decisions. Brittany and Tyler lost their house, as I predicted. They're now renting a much smaller place and seem to be learning to live within their actual means. Jake paid back our grandfather and has stopped with the get-rich-quick schemes, focusing instead on building legitimate savings. Have any of them apologized or acknowledged what they did? Not yet. But Uncle Steve tells me there have been some family conversations about how badly they handled the situation. Maybe someday we'll be able to rebuild our relationships on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. For now, though, I'm perfectly content with the life I've built for myself. Sometimes the best response to people who don't believe in you is simply to prove them wrong while refusing to let their problems become your problems. The intervention they planned to humble me ended up being the catalyst for the most successful period of my life. And every month when they write that rent check, they're reminded of exactly who the responsible one in the family really was all along.